Why? Why is it easier? It's easier because the Housing Finance Agency, which is the kind of quasi-state agency that regulates tax credit properties in North Carolina, mandates that every property management company managing a tax credit property has to have a policy in place, a written policy in place that is substantially similar to the Housing Finance Agency's own policy, right? And so in that sense, it's very clear. And that's I would say it's an excellent policy. This is just kind of to show you this type of policy. You'll notice that there are differentiations that the policy allows based upon, was it violent or nonviolent? Was it a misdemeanor or a felony? And when it occurred, right? Those three factors that I mentioned before that HUD has determined are very important to include in any criminal history policy. So there will, under the Housing Finance Agency's policy, there will be periods where there's an automatic exclusion of an applicant. There are going to be periods where there's not any sort of automatic exclusion, where there's no exclusion. And then there's going to be a middle ground where an individualized assessment needs to occur. And this is based upon the different classes and categories of crimes under North Carolina criminal law, right? So this is a policy to emulate if you don't already have a policy in place. You can find this policy on the Housing Finance Agency's website. It's a policy that they put in place after a lot of back and forth with property managers. It's been in effect, I think, since 2018. And so, you know, I think it's worked out. I think it has a track record to show that it is a feasible and usable criminal history policy that is fair housing compliant and fair, but also allows housing providers to exclude individuals with a criminal history that would really pose a safety threat, right? While allowing individuals with a criminal history that would not pose a safety threat in as tenants. Okay. So looking, see here. Okay, seeing that. Follow-up question regarding previous discussions. Who determines if the property is public or private? Okay, county funds. Question is, where does the county get the money? Are those pass-through monies that the county has received from HUD? If the county is using home monies or CDBG monies or ARP monies or other HUD funds and is using those monies to provide funds for property development, then I would say that the housing provider has to pay for that modification, right? And it would be considered public for this purpose. Not public like a public housing authority, but public just to differentiate between public and private as to who pays for that modification, okay? A tax credit property without any other HUD subsidy going into the property is private and not considered public. So tax credits by itself doesn't make a property public for purposes of determining who pays for that modification. Okay, looking, let's see, just trying to see if there's anything else. I point out legal aid has local offices. Thank you very much, Joseph. Yes, in addition to PISCA, there are multiple legal aid offices throughout the mountain counties. And PISCA Legal Services, which is not part of Legal Aid of North Carolina, provides similar services, but is not the only entity providing free legal assistance to low-income individuals and tenants. And so certainly for housing advocates and tenant advocates out there that are watching this, there are many legal resources, not enough, but there are legal resources for you to reach out to. Thank you, Joseph.
Jack,
Yes, Erica, I can hear you.
Okay, I don't sound like a robot. That's good.
You do not sound like a robot.
There are a couple more that I see here.
Yes.
One question is about, have you seen any of this play out in terms of banned lists on tax credit properties? Would the same policy from the Housing Finance Agency apply?
Okay. Banned lists?
Yes.
Like a banned list, like individuals who are not allowed?
Madeline, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, okay, so a banned list, I understand a banned list. So property management companies, landlords may have a banned list, individuals who have convicted crimes or are being banned from coming onto the property. These are not tenants. These are relatives or friends or other individuals who might seek to come onto the property. And so I'm not sure if the Housing Finance Agency policy specifically talks to ban lists. There is a written tenant selection policy that is on the Housing Finance Agency's website, of which criminal history is just a part, right? It's much larger than that and covers many more issues. I don't remember it talking specifically about ban lists. And so I would want to know, a ban list by itself is not necessarily illegal or prohibited. I guess its application and how it's being applied and who it's being applied to could violate the Fair Housing Act. It would, you'd have to know more facts.
And I have one more here from Terry, and then I see Daniel's hand up. So this is, can a landlord evict someone for wall damage from tenant falls due to Parkinson's? The falls have caused a lot of wall damage, and the landlord states concern the tenant may get hurt. So the landlord charge the tenant for the damage.
Okay, so a tenant with disability causes some damage to the wall. The unit is still habitable, but there's a hole in the wall that needs to be patched up, and who pays for that? Regardless of the disability, if a tenant does more damage than just normal wear and tear, then the landlord can either deduct that from a security deposit or seek to have the tenant pay for that damage. Now, that's different than normal wear and tear. Like, for example, if there's markings from a wheelchair, black marks on the wall from a wheelchair, or indentations on the rug from a wheelchair, that would be normal wear and tear. But if there was a punched hole in the wall, and maybe I misunderstood, but if there was even if that occurred as a result of somebody's non-intentional muscle jerk that ended up damaging the wall, I think that the tenant could still be found to be financially liable. That would not certainly be the basis for eviction. And I would push back very hard, at least based upon the facts known to me at this moment, against any sort of eviction. Regardless of disability, the mere damage to a wall by itself, I don't know, would be considered a substantial breach of the lease warranting eviction. It could be a breach, certainly, and could require that the tenant pay for that. I think there would be an even stronger argument if that's a tenant with a disability and the damage was related to that tenant's disability. That's certainly then, under no situation would that be a basis for eviction.
Thank you. And Daniel?
Hey, my name is Daniel Young. I'm the community outreach worker for the YMI.
Hey,
And I want to speak on about the ban list. The ban list was put in place to target the Black community here in Asheville.
okay,
The residents that stay in Hillcrest and public housing, and they have made, I know, $1 million off of us. People that's from the housing, that's continuing to be targeted by these Asheville police, and I think that needs to be removed, period.
okay,
I mean, you got people that's from Asheville that can't even go visit their friends, no matter, they got charges and stuff. I mean, things happen.
mhm,
That's one of the things that need to be removed. It's a racial profile for the police to target us as Black people here in Asheville. And I
mhm.
think that needs to be addressed as soon as possible.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, certainly one could make a claim that a ban list, depending upon how it's being applied, could have what's called a disparate impact or a disproportionate negative effect, an unjust effect upon a protected group under the Fair Housing Act, here persons of color, right? That's possible. I can tell you that I'm not aware personally of a successful lawsuit on that. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be advocacy to challenge that ban list, and that ban list may be overbroad and may be applied in a discriminatory way. And so I think it's certainly one can push back on the ban list. I think that I don't know of any court that would prohibit a housing provider from working with police to prohibit somebody who had been convicted of a crime on the property, who wasn't a tenant, from coming back out onto the property. But I also know of situations where ban lists have been overly broad, discriminatorily applied, and you know, in that type of situation could violate the Fair Housing Act.
Yes, I mean, from my point of view, from my experience, I know people that's been on the ban list for 20 years now.
Right. So I would argue that just like any sort of criminal history analysis, even if somebody was initially put on a ban list for a conviction, that 20 years is just out of whack. It's just completely unreasonable. Certainly, if there's not a recent subsequent event, then that is not reasonable at all. And if it's a tax credit property, I would say that contacting the Housing Finance Agency on that, if advocacy with that individual tax credit property is unsuccessful, there is a compliance person that the Housing Finance Agency has. And I think her name is Susan Westbrook. And, you know, I would encourage housing advocates to raise that. I don't think that based upon what you're saying, that doesn't sound reasonable to me.
All right, thank you.
And Brian, is your hand out? Brian Alexander?
Yes, I'm Brian Alexander. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, I work with Legal Aid of North Carolina. I just wanted to speak up on behalf of our offices in Western North Carolina, our offices in Boone and Morganton, and Silva and Murphy handle fair housing cases for clients in 23 counties in Western North Carolina. And
Great.
our number is 866-219-5262. Thank you very much.
Shameless advertising. I think that's great. Thank you, Brian. I think it's important for those of you who are advocates and tenants and service providers for you to know that legal aid offices have eviction diversion programs and do landlord-tenant work in addition to all of the other legal assistance that they provide for free to low-income individuals. They are an ally and somebody that I would strongly encourage folks to connect up with. And certainly, if anybody is aware of somebody who is experiencing an eviction or has experienced housing discrimination, at the end of this presentation, I have the toll-free numbers, and I would, if you didn't get it from Brian right now, you should copy it down. It's on the last slide. And you can also obviously go on the web, Legal Aid of North Carolina. It's easy to access on the web.
Just drop some links in the chat for folks.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna do the last 4 slides just for those of you that receive HUD monies of some kind. It's important to know that in addition to not intentionally discriminating against anybody, all HUD funding recipients have an affirmative duty to do more than that. You have to affirmatively further fair housing. That's required of HUD by statute, but it's also required of all HUD funding recipients and subrecipients. So if HUD gives CDBG or home monies to the Department of Commerce, and the Department of Commerce then gives some of those monies to Buncombe County or Haywood County or Madison County, any of those, then the subrecipient, the county itself that gets those monies, has a duty to affirmatively further fair housing, right? So again, they have to do more than just not discriminate. They have to take affirmative steps to deal with racial and ethnic segregation and impediments to fair housing. And so that doesn't mean that they have to eliminate all housing discrimination by next week or next year, but they have to take some steps, real steps, meaningful steps to address racial and ethnic segregation and to address impediments or barriers to fair housing in their jurisdiction, right? So what could those be? Well, let me just say, I already said this, right? So HUD is required to do it, and all HUD funding recipients are required. And whether it's home monies, ESG monies, HAPA, CDBG, all HUD monies trigger that affirmatively furthering requirement. Also applies to public housing authorities, right? So under the previous administration, this requirement was watered down. Under the current administration, there's been an attempt by the current HUD to strengthen and require more under this statute. So there was recently what's called this interim final rule, basically, by title, restoring the AFFH requirements and definitions, right? And rescinding the Trump administration's policy on this. So the bottom line is, for HUD funding recipients, it's now again a requirement that you will have to regularly certify your compliance with the requirement that you take meaningful action to combat residential segregation and address these barriers to fair housing. What those things are and what constitutes meaningful action is yet to be determined. I can tell you it has to be more than just one training or a poster contest. It certainly would require transparency and community involvement in the use of these monies, meaningful community involvement, not just, kind of pro forma involvement, to include the voice of the recipient communities in that process. I know for certain that is currently being done. I know out east, Rocky Mount, which is a HUD funding recipient, has done that through advocacy with the legal aid office there and advocacy groups in the African American community there, pushed to have a greater voice in the use and spending of these HUD monies. And so certainly here out west, among the mountain counties, I know that that process would also be part of meaningful conduct to address racial segregation and to address barriers to fair housing, right? So community and meaningful community involvement, transparency, making sure that the placement of affordable housing doesn't further historic patterns of racial segregation. There are many things that local entities and recipients of HUD monies can do. At the Fair Housing Project, we would be more than happy to consult and talk to any local governments about this in more detail. Certainly, I would encourage local governments to speak with Land to Sky and the other Council of Government agencies on how to make sure that you are furthering fair housing in the use of these monies. It's very, very important. The money can be put to good use, but it's also important that the money be put to good use in a way that furthers fair housing. So I can tell you that although HUD has said that it wants meaningful action again and is going to review the use of HUD monies, and as of at least last year, that has come into effect. I am not aware of any specific technical assistance that HUD has issued in terms of how to apply this. So that is still a question mark. I put TBD, to be determined. For those of you that are in local governments, I would encourage you to look at or have your grants administrators look at the HUD website or contact HUD to determine what other assistance they can provide. We at the Fair Housing Project are happy to talk to you about this if you would like to. There have been materials nationally distributed on how to further fair housing at the local level that we would be happy to share with you. So that is the last part of my presentation. You guys have been very patient. I'm happy to take any other questions. Again, I'm tried to answer every question, but if anybody has other questions, I'm more than happy to answer them now. Or not. If nobody else has a question.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
The Diva View is about to be torn down by housing.
Which place?
Diva View is public housing.
Right.
I want to know what is HUD doing to help those residents that are not going to be allowed to be moving back into Diva View.
Right.
This is the same thing they did with the residents from Mountainside. Right, they said they was going to tear it down, rebuild, and let the residents come back. And we know in all reality, they're not letting these residents come back. They let 10 to 20 residents come back to Lee Walker Heights and probably 10 at Mountainside. So what is HUD going to do for these residents who are not going to be able to go back to housing that's going to be homeless? Are they going to give them the same option as they're giving to the homeless people that Asheville is all of a sudden just found $2.1 million to help the homeless? What about the residents that's already in housing?
I'm sorry, that's an excellent question. Obviously, I'm not HUD, but public housing authorities are covered by the Fair Housing Act and that affirmatively furthering requirement that I just mentioned. And so they have to comply with it. And in their process, they had to submit to HUD a plan on how they're going to demolish and rebuild this housing. and community groups have leverage. You have a voice. If you believe that, I don't know the specifics of what you're talking about, but if you and housing advocates believe that the housing authority is not doing it in a way that furthers fair housing and addresses the housing concerns of the African-American community and the African-American tenants who are going to be displaced, then you have a right to make your concerns known to HUD, specifically about this public housing authority plan and project. And I would encourage you to speak with other housing advocates, whether it's through legal aid or not, to determine what your rights are to meaningfully be part of this process. The Public Housing Authority is supposed to include the community in the process. I don't know, again, what the specific facts are, but if you believe that that has not been meaningfully done, then I would encourage you to make your concerns known. Contact legal aid, and they would be happy to explain to you what the rights are regarding this, if you haven't already done that.
Couldn't Pisgah legal aid go to the residents and talk to those residents?
Yes.
Besides those residents coming to them. I mean, we need more people.
Yes. So both Pisgah Legal Services and legal aid offices. I think Pisgah is the main. I know there's a legal aid office in Asheville as well as Pisgah Legal. And yeah, I mean, I can't speak for them, but I know that they do community education. And I would encourage you to contact Pisgah Legal if the community wants to be informed about their legal rights in this process. I mean, you got to ask, and so I would encourage you to contact either or both legal aid and Pisgah Legal if the community believes that it hasn't been properly informed and wants to know more about their legal rights in this.
Okay, thank you.
So, any other questions? I got 5 more minutes, or we could end 5 minutes early. Nobody's ever complained about ending a training early.
There is one question that I think I might be able to help answer, maybe. Someone saw a webinar from California Housing Advocates about furthering fair housing. There's a reference of using opportunity mapping tools to analyze how HUD and LIHTC sites are faring in terms of addressing historic segregation. Is opportunity mapping a tool being used in NC around fair housing issues? So I don't know if, Jack, do you know the answer to this?
I don't. I know that in assessments of fair housing, used to be called analysis of impediments, I know that the planning people in the city of Wilmington did an excellent mapping job. They did an assessment for fair housing and used mapping specifically in targeting impediments, and the overlap between lack of housing and racial and ethnic segregation. But I don't know of any other example that I can refer people to.
And we are working with our sister agencies, so the other councils of government, Southwestern and Caroline Wilfrenius on the call here from Southwestern, Foothills, which is just to the southeast of us, McDowell, Rockford, Pope, and then basically the Burke County and kind of our larger surrounding counties to look at opportunities for housing development. So looking at public housing using all the tools available. So LIHTC, new market tax credits, opportunity zones, anything that can improve opportunities for affordable and workforce housing in the Western region. So
That's
that's
great.
an application we've made to Appalachian Regional Commission, and we hope to hear about that soon. It's in the final review there. So once that happens, we'll have a mapping tool in order to look at where some of these could be located and potential partners from our nonprofit as well as our private sector side, so we can hopefully continue developing properties of all income levels, because we know we have a housing crisis here in the West
Huh.
and have had for a while. So
Yeah.
I don't know that we haven't talked about, but I'll look at the Wilmington model because that would be really interesting to see if layering in some of those other issues like segregation and red line areas and things like that too.
Well, Erica, after this, let's just email each other and I will put you in touch with Suzanne in Wilmington. I'm sure she'd be happy to share that.
Thank you.
That document with you. There's obviously not enough affordable housing. I don't have to tell anybody that. It's obvious. You know, so there needs to be more affordable housing. But in addition to that, where that affordable housing is placed is a fair housing issue. And it's important to make sure that, you know, it's not just more affordable housing put in the already existing low-income community. And so it needs to be in other higher opportunity areas next to employment opportunities and services, and meaningful community involvement needs to be part of it. That is part of the fair housing analysis, that there be meaningful community involvement. So good luck. I want to thank you for allowing me to talk for the past 2 hours. I hope it was of some relevancy and use. Please, if anybody either themselves is experiencing housing discrimination, or if you are aware of anybody that has experienced housing discrimination, call our toll-free number. It's right there on the screen. I encourage folks also to go to our website. It's an excellent website with a lot of resources, and give us a call. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Jack. There have already been a ton of thank yous in the chat, but we're really grateful for your time. This was an awesome training.
Well, thank you for hosting.
Thank you all. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll have the materials available shortly. Bye-bye.